right now. You know, after lunch, when you enter into what I call food coma, so this is our remedy for all of that. You're not going to have any problem staying alert and focused on this next presenter. He's well known not only in the state of Missouri, but around the country for his defense of his home near St. Louis back in the day when Black Lives Matter and Antifa and thuggery and so forth and so on tried to threaten his wife with rape and murder and property destruction and so forth. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, the incredible Mark McCloskey is here. Mark?
All right. How many of us like our freedom? How many of us think we've got a right to defend our lives? How many of us think we've got a right to defend our home and our families? How many of us recognize that those rights are granted to us by God as human beings made in the image of the Lord? How many of us believe that that which God gives us, no government ought to be able to take away? You know, I'm going to talk a little bit here about this event. I had a different presentation planned for today, but I'm going to have to cut short a little bit of what happened to us because of what's happening in the country today. But you know, the reason I'm standing here today is on June 28th, 2020, God came knocking on my door disguised as an angry mob, and it changed our lives forever. You know, before I get into the events, you got to kind of appreciate, those of you who live in the civilized world, or those of you who live outside of the city of St. Louis, which compared to that, everything's a civilized world. The city of St. Louis is such a remarkably dangerous place, you cannot imagine it. After this event, Mayor Giuliani and Bernie Carrick, the former police commissioner in New York, came down and spent a couple of days with us, and we're out to dinner. I'm talking to Commissioner Carrick about the relative danger levels in St. Louis versus New York City. How many people here think that New York City is kind of a dangerous place, right? 8,400,000 citizens in the city of New York, and at that point it had about 300 murders. 300,000 people in the city of St. Louis, at that point we had 262. 20 times the murder rate of New York City. And that's the background level of violence in St. Louis before you add in the George Floyd effect, okay? And so now we're talking the spring of 2020. On the night of June the 1st and June the 2nd of 2020, those people that claim to have the moral high ground, those people who claim to be the advocates for inclusion and equity and diversity, the people that claim to love everything and everybody decided the best way to show their love for the city of St. Louis was to burn it down. That night on June the 1st of 2020, they set fire to the city of St. Louis, they looted the shops, they burned buildings, they shot 4 policemen, they murdered retired police captain David Dorn. But the most impressive thing that my wife and I saw, we're sitting upstairs watching a live helicopter feed on TV, and we watched the 7-Eleven in downtown St. Louis. 2 blocks from police headquarters. From the time the first brick went through the window, and they went in, they looted the place empty, then somebody threw fire into the building becomes engulfed in flames, the roof comes down. 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes from watching this on television. You know how many police showed up? 0. You know how many firemen showed up? 0. And Patty and I look at each other and say, you know what? When the fit hits the shan, you're out there in your wild lonesome. Well, in the ensuing month, more and more of the businesses in our neighborhood got broken into. I live in what's called a private place in St. Louis. Back 130 years or so ago, when St. Louis was a big, dirty industrial town, in order to have a clean place to live, people would go out in the countryside, buy some farmland, put walls around it, build houses. We own the streets, the utilities, the houses, everything inside those walls is just as much private property as your own living room. And the one I live in is called Portland Place, but it's in the city of St. Louis, surrounded by the city of St. Louis. 2 blocks north of my house is one of the worst ghettos in the world, one of the most dangerous places on the planet. Most years, the most dangerous place on the planet. But my office, my law firm, is in an 1880s Victorian house 3 blocks further into the city. And we started seeing all the neighborhood businesses getting broken into and boarded up. And one Friday I went into the little mom and pop drugstore around the corner, and I see that all the steel roll-up doors have been pulled off their rails, the windows are all broken out, and it's a mess. So I went inside and I said to the owner, I said, what the heck happened? And he said, well, the burglar alarm went off. And I said, would you come down and see what's going on? He said, no, I didn't want to get killed. I said, well, so what happened? Well, they broke in, they stole everything they could steal, they destroyed everything they couldn't steal. Well, I said, well, how long were they in there? He said, 6 hours. I said, did the police ever come? He said, yeah, 10 hours after the alarms went off. Once again, when the fit hits the shan, you're out there in your wild ones. One of the advantages of living in the city of St. Louis, if you're a criminal, is that there's no risk of retribution for crime. And so if you want to do something illegal in St. Louis, you can even advertise it. And so we have this Antifa organization in St. Louis called Expect Us St. Louis, headed by a young lady that you might know the name of, Cori Bush, who is not yet the stupidest congresswoman in the history of the world. She was merely the stupidest political agitator in the history of the world. She and her partner, Rasheen Aldridge, who was until recently in the Missouri House of Representatives, now an alderman in St. Louis, they put out a flyer saying they were going to have a mob action in my neighborhood on Friday, June 26th of 2020. And, you know, because we knew they liked to burn stuff, and there's a lot of stuff in our house that we didn't want to have burned, including us, we went out and got a whole bunch of fire extinguishers and put them around the house. And because we knew they like to shoot people, and we didn't want to have to get shot without being able to fight back, I put a whole bunch of guns around the house. Well, that Friday afternoon came and went, and there was nothing. And we, dodged that bullet literally and figuratively. And so we went out. We've got a little farm outside of St. Louis, and Patty and I went out to work on the farm over the weekend. And Sunday afternoon, our then 31-year-old daughter came into town from Chicago to have dinner with us. And we're setting up on the side porch to have dinner. And all of a sudden, we start hearing the mob form down the street. And you start hearing them thumping on the street with their big sticks, chanting all this stupid nonsense chant, whose streets, our streets, no justice, no peace, no racist police. And my favorite one, because it was coming from Cori Bush, chanting into her megaphone, you can't stop the revolution. You can't stop the revolution. Well, I went out, opened the gate, which is what separates our neighborhood from the city, and looked down Kings Highway Boulevard. Now, Kings Highway is a 6-lane wide major north-south thoroughfare which connects North St. Louis to South St. Louis and the Barnes Hospital Complex. Always a remarkably busy street. But I look out there and I see the entire street filling with people. And I pulled that gate closed and I went back up on the porch. And as soon as I get up there, the entire street in front of our house, from side to side, 6 lanes wide, is filled with screaming, angry people, thumping on the ground with sticks, screaming, shouting, and all that's separating us from them is this 132-year-old iron gate. I look over at Patty and I say, God, I hope they don't come this direction. Well, right then the gate bursts open and they start filing in. Well, I went out to the corner of the porch and I stood up there and I said the 2 most racist, white, superior words known the human language. I said, private property. Now, being communists, that pissed them off, right? And they just kept storming in more and more and more. So I went in, I reached around the corner where I had my AR sword, and I pulled it out, and so I stand up there on the porch, and I start saying some really unpleasant things to these people. Now there's 100 or more that already got in by that point. And I started saying things like, private property, go back. I used a bad word. I said, get the hell out of my neighborhood. And I'm standing up there, I'm up on a porch. I've got about, 20 or 30 feet between me and a hedge, and then there's a low wall, another 20 or 30 feet of grass between me and the mob. And I think I'm doing okay, right? And Patty's gone inside to call 911. My daughter went inside to call 911. To absolutely no avail, of course. But all of a sudden, I see Patty out there in the grass in front of me, between me and the mob, waving that dumbass little Bryco pistol over her head. Now, by the way, that cabinet that she pulled that little Bryco pistol out of, I staged a nice 12-gauge Mossberg on top of it. Now, Patty never had a gun in her hand before, so that big shotgun looked intimidating for her. So she pulled open the drawer where I kept a bunch of junk guns from this manufacturer, Bryco, makes these guns that are defective. They have this tendency to go fully automatic and kill their owners. And we sued them a number of times, and a whole bunch of those junk guns from that litigation, including one that was just a prop gun for that litigation, which is the one that she, knowing everything about guns, decided to pick up and take out there with her. But now I'm standing up on the porch, and I got a problem because she's in my line of fire, right? Now I don't have a clear shot. We've been married, it's 38 years next Tuesday, so about 35 years at that point. And I didn't want to accidentally have to put a pellet in her, so now I got to get down in the grass too, right? And so I come down on the front yard, and now you see all these pictures of us standing in front of the house. Well, I'll tell you how serious it got at that point. There's another picture where you see me leaning over and talking to Patty. And I'll tell you what was going on right then. There are two guys who are coming up the front porch at us wearing body armor. One of them's got camo-colored body armor on, and he reaches into the ammo pouches in his armor, pulls out 2 loaded magazines, clicks them at me so I can see that they're loaded, points at me and says, "You are next." The guy standing next to him is wearing Desert Storm type body armor, light colored stuff. He turns around, it says Human Shield on his back, and he's packing a sidearm. And they keep creeping more and more and more and more towards us like this. And I leaned over at Patty and I said, "If those guys come any closer, I'm going to have to kill them." And she leaned over at me and she said, "You're not killing anybody tonight." The voice of reason, okay? But the thing that you saw on television, that same 32-second clip that played endlessly in the media, that was the last 32 seconds after essentially everybody had gone. But for 17 and a half minutes, we stood out there facing what was now 350 to 500 people, screaming that they're going to murder us, and rape and murder your wife, saying a whole lot of words I can't say in mixed company. We're going to burn down your house. You've got a business, your business is gone, even threatened to kill our dog. That's where I'm going to sleep. That's where my kitchen's going to be. That's where I'm going to take my bath, point to different windows of the house after we kill you and take over the house. Well, this is the advantage of the Second Amendment. 2 of us with guns holding off, and only one of us knew how to use a gun anyway. 2 of us holding off a mob of hundreds that were threatening to kill us. We didn't have to put off a shot. Nobody got hurt. Although we just recently got sued for $20 million in federal court in St. Louis for some lady that claims that we have traumatized her, that after she broke into my neighborhood and threatened to kill me, I caused her emotional trauma. But anyway, the gift that keeps on giving. But that's the story everybody's heard about, because the media then portrayed that immediately as us waving guns at peaceful social justice warriors walking peacefully by our house on the way to the mayor's house, right? Where Mayor Cruzen doesn't live in our neighborhood. Mayor Cruzen doesn't live in a private place. Mayor Cruzen lives 2 blocks north and a half a mile west of my house. And by the way, the mob had been there regularly because they protested in front of our house regularly. So, but we got a tip the next Tuesday morning. That was June 28th. Next Tuesday morning, we get a tip from a client of ours that they're coming back on Friday to kill us. And this is a young black lady who we've known for a long time, considered her to be like a family friend. We represented her and her sister and her mom. We'd gone to her college graduation. Her husband was a guy, when he got out of the Army, he joined the city police department, got depressed and committed suicide. We went to his funerals. There'd be times when we'd be the only Caucasians at their family functions. We really knew these folks. But this young lady had become a brainwashed member of that Antifa organization. And she called up that Tuesday morning and said, "What you guys did was inexcusable, and you're going to have to die, and that they're coming back on Friday, they're going to kill you, and they're going to burn down your house, and there's nothing we can do about it." Well, this wasn't just an idle, one-moment conversation. She kept Patty on the phone for an hour and a half, just ripping her up one side and down the other. Needless to say, that caused us a little bit of anxiety. Now, in my business, I've been a personal injury lawyer my whole life, and from time to time, we represent some people where we might need some private security. And so we usually use St. Louis City and St. Louis County Police as secondary security, right? None of the guys that we dealt with in the past wanted to do security for fear of the bad press. We got referred to a place down in Farmington, Missouri that does high-tech security all over the world, a bunch of special forces guys. And I called them up and they said they'd gotten bad press over the Ferguson riots and they didn't want to do it. I said, "Then what the heck am I supposed to do?" And the owner says, "Well, if I were you, I'd take whatever you can't live without, I'd put it in the vehicles, and I'd abandon the house." I said, "No effing way in heck that we're going to do that. We're going to go down to the ship if we have to, but we're not going to abandon the house." Well, earlier in the week, I'd gotten a call from the White House. And the gentleman says, the president wants to express his support, and if there's ever anything we can do for you, give us a call, okay? So I called that number back up, and I said, well, now's a pretty stinking good time, okay? And so he gave me Mark Meadows' cell phone number, and I called up Mark Meadows and told him this story. And then the next phone call I made was to Tucker Carlson. And we're sitting on the bench in the kitchen, and Tucker puts us live on the air. And he says, I'm talking to Mark McCloskey. I can hear Mrs. McCloskey sobbing in the background. The mob's coming back tomorrow to kill him. The city police have been ordered to stand down. The state's not going to give them any protection. And if we don't do something, they're going to die. Well, to make a long story short, and by the way, we still thought we were going to die the next night. We spent the whole week, we hadn't slept since that Sunday. We spent the week hiding our valuables under beds and in floors and stuff like that. Like it makes sense, right? They're going to burn down the house, and then, stuff we put under the bed is going to be okay. Our brains weren't necessarily working that well. But anyway, but it's now Thursday night, and our daughter has stayed over with us instead of going back to Chicago because of what happened. But she went down the basement, got her favorite stuffed animal from when she was a little kid, came upstairs, gave us each a hug and a kiss, and left because she couldn't make it. Never expected to see us alive again. I mean, that's how serious it was. But when the mob hit that gate the next night at about 7 o'clock, maybe about 6:30, the miracle starts to happen. An ex-Navy SEAL named Jim, when he heard the call to arms, just threw his gear in the back of his truck, drove straight through from here, the 4th generation cattle farmer in Kansas, got there at about 6:30 in the afternoon. By the time the mob hit the gate at about 7, we had 6 ex-Navy SEAls, we had 10 secondary employment cops, we had the FBI light aircraft circling the top of the house, we had what we used to call in the Reagan administration, peace through superior firepower, and once again, the mob hit the gate, and it surged back and forth, and we didn't get all clear until about 4:30 in the morning. All right? Two events I always like to highlight from that night. It was a harrowing night. But at about 2:30 in the morning, and Patty and I made a big point of being out in the patios and out on the roof so that people could see that we were there, that we hadn't been intimidated. But at about 2:30 in the morning, that SEAL named Jim jumps on me and knocks me down. And I say, what the heck's going on? And he says, well, we were scoping the surrounding high-rises, and we saw somebody scoping back, and we thought you were about to get taken out. Right then his radio goes off. Turns out it was an FBI sniper doing cover for us. So, not a bad thing. But my favorite moment of that whole event was maybe 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and the mob's been outside the gate for a while, and Cori Bush is out there with her megaphone chanting, "You can't stop the revolution. You can't stop the revolution." Well, Jim the SEAL rested his hands on the butt of his M4 and says, "Oh yes, I can." But once again, not a shot got fired, nobody got hurt, and we held off the mob. But it didn't fit the narrative. It's kind of hard to talk about peaceful social justice warriors walking peacefully by our house when they come there specifically to kill us and burn down the house. So media never covered any of that part of it, okay? But can I have the next slide, please? One of the things that it did was it gave us an opportunity to have a voice. I've been an ardent anti-communist my whole life. My dad he was a member of the John Birch Society. I started giving public presentations against communist expansionism in 1977 with the takeover of Rhodesia by Robert Mugabe. Colonel Oliver North and I have been friends for over 30 years because during the Iran-Contra deal, we had fundraisers at our house for him for his criminal defense fund. And then again in the 90s when he was running for Senate in Virginia, we did fundraisers for him. But I never had any interest in becoming a politician or doing anything, in kind of the overt manner. But the Lord moves in mysterious ways. And we got that next morning, that July the 4th, 2020, when we survived the night. And we got the all clear at about 4:30. And we went to bed and got a couple hours of sleep. We got up that morning. We went into my mother's items. My mom's been dead for a long time, but she was a big Republican, and she'd gotten a guy named Jack Fiechner elected to the United States House of Representatives from the 2nd District. First Republican in a long time. He had given her a flag that hung over the Capitol building. We went and found that flag, put it out in front of our house, had a picture of us taken which we now use on our cards that say "Never Back Down." Patty and I made a vow that day that we were going to do whatever we could for the rest of our lives to save this republic, to pull back our freedoms and to do everything necessary to restore America to the way it was when we were kids. And we've been doing that ever since. Can I have the next slide, please? We got invited by President Trump to address the Republican National Convention, which was a great honor, and it was a little intimidating, I got to tell you, for two folks that have never been directly involved in politics in that way. We also got invited to join the Trump campaign. We campaigned, we did through Texas with Colonel Allen West. For a while, Patty, we did 2 tours through Pennsylvania because it was supposed to be the key to the election. It's a picture of me in front of the Team Trump bus on tour in Pennsylvania. And we did 2 full weeks of campaigning for the president because it was supposed to be the key to the election. One of the fun things was, one of the last things we did for the president was a rally in eastern Pennsylvania. We drew so many people, the county governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf, shut us down, right, canceled us. Well, we did a pop-up rally, one county over, with no advance, no advertisement, no nothing. We just moved one county over and set up the rally. We drew 450 people. Joe Biden was on that same stage 3 weeks later. After 3 weeks of advertising and promotion, he drew 8 people. 8 people. And we're supposed to believe he won Pennsylvania. You know, the night of the election, we're up watching the returns. It's about 11 o'clock at night. We're 600,000 votes ahead in Pennsylvania. I looked over at Patty and I said, we wasted 2 weeks of our life. It's not even going to be close in Pennsylvania, okay? I went to bed. Next morning I wake up and guess what? They call Pennsylvania for the, senile old poop that thinks he's president of the United States. But here's the thing. We have, amongst other things, kind of another slide, please. Roy Blunt decides not to run for Senate, right? And I had never had any intention of running for political office, but when he decided he wasn't going to run, people started asking me. The first guy to do it was President Trump's White House photographer. And I said, well, look, there's no offices available in Missouri. We got a Republican governor, 2 Republican senators. It's pretty much hooked up. My state representative, my House representative is a Republican. And then Roy Blunt says he's not going to run for election. And people start calling up and asking me if I'm interested in doing it. Well, a neighbor of mine had been in the Reagan cabinet, and he's a fairly old guy, but he was well connected. And so I call him up and I say, what do you think about the concept of me running for the Senate? And he said, just go outside, drive some nails through your feet. It'll feel better and it won't take as long. I failed to take his sage advice, okay? But now I'm not running for a damn thing, okay? We're just still doing this, and I gotta tell you why. I mean, my daughter, when they sprung COVID on us, the first thing she said, because I don't tend to be very quiet around the house, she said, Dad, is this the end you've always talked about, or is this just a test? And I said, I think this is just a test. I think this is just a test to see what the American people will tolerate. And I've always called, by the way, this picture is me announcing my Senate campaign and Tucker Carlson show. And Tucker's, he's the one guy out there that I really trust and I really believe in other than Donald Trump. And he was a lifesaver for us. But I always call the COVID-19 lockdowns the final exam on American freedom. I always figured that FEMA would create some kind of faux emergency and declare martial law and lock us all down and tell us we couldn't leave our homes and we couldn't go to church and we couldn't go to school and we couldn't go see our own parents die in a hospital. But I figured they'd have to put a gun to our heads to make us comply. And then 3 years ago last March, the government just asked. And everybody did it, right? Even if it cost them your job, your livelihood, your life savings, your business, even if it meant you couldn't see your parents or grandparents in the nursing home pass away, even if it meant as a guy you couldn't see the birth of your own kids, everybody just did it. And I said to myself, and I said to Patty, and anybody that will listen, what more proof could the power elite have of how absolutely cowed the American people have become, other than the fact that they did nothing and they accepted all this, no matter what it cost them. And you heard Tom Renz here this morning, getting vaccinated, right? With an experimental vaccine that, you have to just appreciate the control they had over everybody's minds to allow them to tolerate this. Well, that's the primary reason I'm still doing this, because we can never allow that to happen again. And I say this every time. When President Biden, and I hate using that expression, but President Biden imposes some kind of enormously unconstitutional restriction on us, like, for example, the Disinformation Governance Board. How come there weren't 50 Republican senators standing on the steps of the Capitol building saying, we cannot have censorship, we can't have state-sponsored censorship in the United States of America, you cannot do this in a place of the First Amendment, but just crickets, right? When President Biden puts his hand in the Bible on January 20th and swears to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and then almost immediately afterwards says, with regard to the eviction moratorium, I know what I'm doing is illegal, I know what I'm doing is unconstitutional, but I'm going to do it anyway. Where were 50 Republican senators and every Republican congressman? Why weren't they standing up here and screaming that if you admit you're violating the Constitution, you need to resign right now or be impeached? It did not happen. When I was running for Senate, we'd go from county to county to county in Missouri, 114 counties in Missouri, and virtually every place we went, the county chairs would say, this used to be a Democrat county, but now we have every office in the courthouse. We've got a Republican state rep. We've got a Republican state senator. And I said, no, you don't. Those are the same people who used to have D's behind their names. They're not going to, and we got super majorities in both houses in Missouri, and what do we get done? Nothing. That's right. Not a goddamn thing, pardon my language. And what do we have in D.C.? You got, when the FBI raided the home of President Trump, did you see Mitch McConnell stand up and say this cannot happen in the United States of America? We saw on Tucker's first show last week, he had a clip of Lindsey Graham speaking with Volodymyr Zelensky, laughing, smirking about the death of Russian soldiers. These are 19, 17-year-old kids. These aren't politicians. These aren't warmongers. These aren't people making billions of dollars for the military-industrial complex. These are young kids being killed for political purposes by people they've never met. What kind of more proof do you need of the absolute evil of the people that run this country, whether they've got R's behind their names or D's behind their names, if they're standing up there gloating about the death of innocent children, all right? This country is now run by people that are truly evil. You can't negotiate with them. You can't bargain with them. They take every sign of negotiation or bargaining as weakness. They will only take, and they will not give back. And they have been doing this for longer than any of us have been alive. They've been doing this incrementally for over 100 years, and they're not going to give up without a fight. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a civil war right now. We've been in a low-grade civil war for several years, but the power elite declared war on America, declared war on you and me directly when they indicted Donald Trump 2 days ago. And that's where I'm going with this. That's why I've kind of changed what I was going to say today. We called it, from more than 2 years ago, I've been referring to what I call coup by subpoena. That they were systematically neutralizing all the strong people in the Republican Party, from Roger Stone and Mike Flynn and Manafort and all the people that were important to President Trump, pulling the teeth out of President Trump. But I got to tell you one thing, I'm still 100% behind Donald Trump, and I got to tell you we all have to be. What is the absolute proof that we have to re-elect Donald Trump president? And it's because the left wants to destroy him no matter what. No matter what. The power elite want to destroy him no matter what. The billionaire class want to destroy him no matter what. Why? Because if he's out of the picture, nobody else can beat them. He's the only guy out there that has the force of will. Now, I went to CPAC here in D.C. this spring, and I met everybody running for president except for Ron DeSantis, who was afraid to show up. But And some of them are really good people. I mean, I like Vivek Ramaswamy. He struck me as a highly intelligent, highly motivated, really sharp guy who's 100% on board with everything I believe in. But they'll never elect to be president. And if they did, he would not have the force of will to stand up against this constant avalanche of abuse. There's only one human being that I can imagine who has taken this kind of abuse for all this time, stood up to it, hasn't backed down, and says, now he's going to do this. He doesn't need to do it. He can't be intimidated because he isn't beholden to anybody. And I'll digress a little bit. The morning after the first assault in my house, if I had been the managing partner of the biggest law firm in St. Louis, when I woke up the next morning, I would have had to go on the apology tour. I would have had to apologize for being boring, apologize for being white, apologize for being successful, and they still would have canned my ass, and I still wouldn't have a job anywhere, right? Because that's what they do. They never forgive, they never forget, and they will punish anybody. There's only one unforgivable crime in America today, and that's standing up against the left. And that's a crime that I continue to commit every day of my life, and it's a crime that Donald Trump will commit every day of his life. And we've got to say, no matter what, we've got to support him. But we're in the middle of a civil war. And the government's not going to save us. The cavalry's not going to come around the corner and save us. It is up to us to save ourselves. You've heard it from virtually every person that's presented here, but I mean this in the strongest possible sense. When I was on the Senate campaign, they'd always ask the other candidates, and they'd say, we have to preserve this. They'd always call it democracy, because that's what you have to say if you want to go to D.C. But they say, what are we going to do to save this republic? And they'd say, well, we've got to protect our democracy for our children and our grandchildren. And I always say, no. It's not your children and your grandchildren. It's the next 6 months. If we don't seize this country back, we will lose it forever. You know, I always say, and people, the left media always makes fun of me for doing it, but I always recite that Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Amongst those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And that's us, ladies and gentlemen. Every bad thing that happens, from the mutilation of children, to kiddie porn, to the invasion of our rights, to vax mandates, to all the things that are going on in the world today, the transfer of hundreds of billions of dollars of our money to support this autocrat in Ukraine, is all happening because we are consenting to it, right? We are allowing it to happen. We are allowing the Justice Department to indict the front-running candidate for the presidency of the United States. And you know, I tweeted out this morning, if we just did something, for example, if on Tuesday between 2 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time and 4 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time, we held a general strike. Everybody just turned their cars off for 2 hours, wherever you were. Shut your businesses, turned off the lights, locked your doors, just stop doing everything. If we got even 10% of the 70 million people plus that voted for Donald Trump to just do that for 2 hours, it would show the world that we aren't going to take it. But you know, it takes more than that. I've devoted my life to it now. It's cost me my business, cost me a lot of money. If you Google the McCloskey Law Center for 2 years, it said permanently closed. If you ask your cell phone right now, put in the name Mark McCloskey, it says, according to Wikipedia, Mark McCloskey is a former personal injury lawyer in St. Louis. I mean, I've been getting canceled the entire time. I'll tell you a fun story. I tend to go on and on. But I'm sitting next to a United States Congressman at a Lincoln Reagan Day dinner. I won't mention names. Blaine Lichtmeyer. And I'm telling him that story. And he says, why don't you sue him? I said, Blaine, you've given him immunity. He says, oh, that Rule 203 thing? I said, no, Blaine, it's 230, okay. But I mean, that's the kind of people that we have in D.C. And you can't count on them to help. And you know, when this goes down the tubes, when, you know, Joe Biden said at the Business Roundtable CEO luncheon a year ago last March, he said that this is an inflection point in American history. He said there's only inflection points like this come along once every 5 or 6 generations. We have to seize with specific reference to the war in Ukraine, seize upon this inflection point. There's going to be a new world order, and the United States needs to lead it. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what's coming down the pike. The Great Reset, the New World Order, the single world communist government, and as Ann was saying earlier today, it's already in place. The noose is already around our necks. We are about to be destroyed, and not in the distant future, not in the times of our children or grandchildren, but in the imminent future, time in months. And ladies and gentlemen, when they do that, you'll lose all your property. When we go to central bank digital currency, and as you know, the president signed an executive order a year ago demanding that it happen, and it's happening right now. Once we go to central bank digital currency, we're all slaves. That is the end. And that is happening right stinking now. And so when you say, what am I supposed to do? I have to make a living. I have to go to work. I have to feed my kids. I have to keep my employees employed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, when the monster takes over, you're all gone anyway. Your wealth is gone, your family's gone, your job is gone. We will become serfs and slaves overtly, not just covertly like now. So whatever it takes, look around the room. When you're any place, if we don't all make a personal stand for freedom right now, this is all going to be lost. Whenever the government wants to impose some unconstitutional mandate, everybody's just got to say no. When the government wants to impose something like central bank digital currency, just have to say no. When the government wants to send, what, now like 18% of our annual defense budget to, you know what Lindsey Graham smirks about killing Russians who are trying to defend their homeland, amongst other things, just say no, we will not tolerate it. If we did that, if we showed the willingness to make genuine sacrifices to save our country, there's some hope we can do it. I usually start my presentations these days by asking an audience, and I'll do it right now, how many of us genuinely believe in our heart of hearts that there's a political solution to our current crisis? Yeah, exactly. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a problem. And you know, we can win this thing. This is not going to be a battle from their side with guns and bombs, because they already control our minds. They already control our access to information. They control the media. They control education. They control the military. And there was an actual coup. And I see the hook weight coming for him. But there was an actual coup that took place in 2020. You remember that shortly after the election, Mark Milley spoke with his counterpart in China and said that if we're going to invade China, I'll give you advance notice. Well, I was on the campaign trail then, and Vicky Hartzler, who was a former congressman who ran for Senate against me, she was on the defense committee. She called him on the carpet and said, "Did you really do that?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, then I'm going to have to ask you for your resignation." Well, that's not the worst of it. On January 7th of 2020, 21, I mean, Nancy Pelosi calls up Mark Milley and says, "You know he's crazy, don't you?" To which Mark Milley said, "Yes," referring to Trump. And he's got his finger on the nuclear codes. And Mark Milley says, "Don't worry about it." He then called in all his chiefs, and he made each of them take a personal oath to him that they would not do anything without his authority. That was a coup. That was a military coup. That was saying, and President Trump at that time was still going to be president for another 3 weeks, but they seized control at that moment. And nobody stood up and said anything. And this came out in the January 6th hearing, when those political prisoners who've been being persecuted for the last almost 3 years now, and nobody said anything about it. So that's what we're up against. But if they don't need to fight us because they already control us. They proved that during the COVID lockdown. The only way we can win this back is by taking back over people's minds, because that's the only peaceful way this is going to get resolved. And the only way we're going to do that is show that enough of us will stand together and fight for this republic, fight for our freedom, do whatever is necessary, no matter what it costs, personally or socially or economically, to pull back that consent of the government, to return this to the country it was when we were kids. I mean, when I was 5 years old, we weren't afraid of everything. I'd get on my bike and ride all around town. I'd ride my bike down to the Ben Franklin 5 and 10. I'd ride my bike to the park. We weren't supposed to be afraid of everything. The government didn't have their hands in everybody's pocket. They didn't. My 34-year-old daughter has never lived in a free country. She doesn't have any memory of what the country was like before the Patriot Act. She never lived in a world where the government didn't listen to your telephone calls and follow you through your cell phones and read your direct messages and read your emails. But I grew up there. The vast majority of the people in this room grew up there, and we can have that back. But it takes showing the world that we're willing to stand up and do it. We're willing to do whatever it takes, no matter what it costs, to return this country's freedom, to return this republic to we, the people, to tell Washington, D.C., and the power elite everywhere, and the billionaire class, and the military-industrial complex, and the medical-industrial complex, that this is our country. It belongs to us. They work for us. They're supposed to be public servants and not public masters, and return this to a country that respects God, respects family, respects freedom, and a place where we kneel when we pray and stand for the American flag. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
That's what I'm talking about, right there. Mark McCluskey. Thank you very much, Mark, for coming out here. And look, this is a real patriot. I remember reporting on their story when McCluskey's were there. I love that story. I think I talked about it for 6 weeks every single night. I love that picture, especially with Mrs. McCluskey and her pistol. Very sexy. Very sexy.
Another one, just one more.
Okay. All right. Well, listen.